I had found that envelope 10 years earlier, right after my grandfather died. I had never opened it. At the time, I told myself it was out of respect. I wanted to honor his memory by trusting the family he had left behind. I wanted to prove that we could be the family he believed we could become. So the envelope stayed sealed. Until now, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper and a smaller, index card-sized document printed on thick security paper with a faint watermark. I unfolded the letter. The smell of old tobacco and peppermint rose from the page, my grandfather's smell. It hit me harder than the storm raging outside. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. My dearest Claire, if you are reading this, it means the wolves are at the door. I hope I'm wrong. I hope your mother and father grew up. I hope your sister found her own way. But I built a fortune by betting on human nature, and human nature rarely changes. You think you own 51% of the company. And you do. But the lawyers call those Class A common shares. They're powerful, but they're vulnerable to things like trusts, marriage consolidation, and bad advice. What nobody knows, not your parents, not the board, and certainly not any husband you might find, is that I created a failsafe. I converted the controlling interest into Class 5 founder shares. Class 5 shares have a unique property, Claire. They are non-transferable. They cannot be moved into a trust. They cannot be sold. They cannot be reassigned to a holding company unless they are accompanied by a physical authentication code that matches the corporate seal in the vault. Without that code, any digital transfer is void. It's just a piece of paper with no teeth. The code is not written down here. It's the date of the day we went fishing at Lake Texoma, followed by the weight of that catfish you caught. You remember it. It was the only time I ever saw you truly proud of yourself. If one day you see people trying to gather everything into one pile for the good of the family, remember this: no one holds the keys but you. And if you do not use this to protect yourself, they will use you to protect themselves. Love, Grandpa. I sat on the floor of the closet, clutching the letter. The numbers surfaced instantly from memory. July 12, 1999. 8 pounds, 4 ounces. 0712 199984. That was the code. The Class 5 key. Suddenly, the pieces of Jeremy's plan snapped together. Why had Gregory Blackwood been so desperate for me to sign the physical document on the kitchen counter if Louise could simply forge my signature digitally? Because the digital forgery was enough to fool the banks. It was enough to move the secondary assets. The cash. The liquid investments, the smaller properties. But for the core of the empire, the 51% voting bloc of Lancaster Holdings, the digital transfer would fail at the clearinghouse level without the Class 5 authentication code. They didn't have the code. Worse than that, they didn't even know the Class 5 shares existed. To them, the transfer was probably hitting some mysterious compliance barrier, the kind that corporate lawyers blame on administrative red tape. They likely believed a physical signature and notarized paperwork would override it. That was why Jeremy had left the folder on the counter. That was why he had pushed so hard for the trust me routine. They had built a beautiful, elaborate digital cage for me. They had even forged my name on the door. But they didn't realize something important. The beast they were trying to trap was already standing outside the bars, holding the only key that mattered. They had initiated a transfer that was technically impossible to complete, and by forging my signature on the trust amendment, they had just committed a felony in order to move assets that without the Class 5 verification would remain suspended in legal limbo. I slowly stood up. Cold calm washed over me. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fly to the Maldives and throw a drink in their faces. In fact, confronting them now would be the worst possible move. If I told them I knew, they would scramble. They would destroy the laptop. They would claim the forgery was a joke, a misunderstanding, a prank taken too far. They would gaslight me. No, I needed them to believe they had won. I needed them to feel safe. I walked back into the kitchen and looked at the folder on the counter, the one Jeremy wanted me to sign. I picked it up. Then I walked into the pantry and slid the document into the shredder. The machine hummed as the pages disappeared. My name. Their lies, turning slowly into confetti. Then I went back to the study and got to work. I compiled everything. The Slack JSON export, screenshots of the flight manifest, the DocuSign audit trail, a photograph of my grandfather's Class 5 letter, and a summary of the suspicious credit card activity from years earlier. When I was done, I opened a new email. 2. Sienna Hollister subject. Urgent corporate fraud, identity theft, Lancaster Holdings. Sienna Hollister was not a family friend. She was a shark. A former federal prosecutor who now ran a boutique firm specializing in complex asset recovery and executive fraud. I had met her once at a charity gala. At the end of our brief conversation, she had handed me her card and said, "If you ever need to kill a snake without getting bitten, call me." I began typing. "Miss Hollister, my husband and members of my family are currently attempting to defraud me of my controlling interest in Lancaster Holdings. They have forged my digital signature on federal trust documents. I have the logs. I have proof of intent, and I possess a Class 5 controlling instrument they are unaware exists. I need to meet tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. I want to burn the enterprise down." I hit send. The email whooshed away. I glanced at the clock. 3 o'clock in the morning. Outside, the hurricane was tearing through the city, ripping branches from trees and flooding the streets below. But inside the penthouse, everything was quiet. I went to the guest bedroom. I locked the door. Then I curled up on the bed not as a victim, but as a witness who had just finished preparing the prosecution's opening statement. I fell asleep to the sound of the wind, dreaming of a fishing trip in 1999 and a catfish that was about to swallow a boat whole. The offices of Hollister and Associates occupied the 40th floor of a glass tower in downtown San Antonio. The city below was still shaking off the storm. Streets glistened like wet asphalt veins. Up here, the air was cool, filtered, and smelled faintly of expensive espresso and predatory competence. Sienna Hollister did not look like someone you cried in front of. She looked like a weapon. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp features and dark hair pulled back into a severe bun. Her eyes studied people the way an actuary studies risk tables, methodically, without emotion. She had made her reputation dismantling Ponzi schemes and prosecuting corporate fraud. Now she billed $1,200 an hour to do essentially the same thing in private practice. I sat across from her at a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single slab of black marble. Between us lay the stack of evidence I had printed at 3 in the morning, the Slack logs, the DocuSign audit trail, the flight manifest, and my grandfather's letter. Sienna had been reading for 20 minutes in total silence. The only sound in the room was the slow, rhythmic tapping of her pen against the desk. Finally, she looked up. She didn't smile. She didn't offer me a tissue. "Claire," she said, her voice low and precise, "you need to understand exactly what you've brought me." She tapped the DocuSign log. "This isn't a divorce case, and it's not a family dispute." She paused. "This is a federal crime scene." My stomach tightened. "Your husband and your sister executed a digital signature on a financial document involving assets regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission," she continued. "They did it across international borders, using offshore connections to alter a trust registered in Texas." She tapped the file again. "That's wire fraud, identity theft, forgery." She leaned slightly forward. "And because Apex Global is a registered investment advisor, your husband has also just committed a very serious breach of fiduciary duty." Her eyes locked onto mine. "If we take this to the U.S. Attorney's Office," she said calmly, "Jeremy doesn't just lose his job. He goes to federal prison. 5 to 10 years minimum." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I had known it was bad, but hearing it translated into criminal statutes made it real. Sienna leaned back and folded her arms. "Here's how the heist works," she said. "Jeremy has been using the power of attorney documents. You sign the ones disguised as tax efficiency measures to leverage the secondary assets of Lancaster Holdings. He's been taking out loans against the rental properties," Sienna said calmly. "The cash reserves, the small commercial strips." She tapped a page in the stack. "That's why your parents have been living so well. Jeremy has been draining the moat to feed them." Then she lifted my grandfather's letter. "But he couldn't get into the castle." She held up the page slightly. "He couldn't touch the 51% voting block because your grandfather, God rest his paranoid Irish soul, locked it down tight." She set the letter back on the desk. "That's why Jeremy needed the new trust." She tapped the forged amendment. "The document you supposedly signed last night removes the Class 5 restriction under the guise of modernizing corporate governance. Once that amendment is filed with the state, the Class 5 protection disappears." I swallowed.